Headspace, what's up? Viwe, the brother from the ancient mother. And if you're watching me right now, you're watching a segment of a channel called The Headspace, which profiles African hip-hop throughout the continent, centering it around the importance and the value of hip-hop as Africans have taken it and what we've done with it thus far. I am your host, and what I do in these segments is I kind of dissect and go into the adventure of African hip-hop, particularly South African, because Ngabasemzansi is what we do. This segment is called the Project Review. We review EPs, albums, mixtapes, basically any notable piece of art that's being brought out by African rap artists right now in the contemporary era. Talking about contemporary, you're watching something that's revolutionary, because in talking and in kind of looking at our growth as the Headspace, Takeza, who's shooting this right now, and I and Fritz have basically decided to have within the review segment something very special. Reviews that don't cater to the contemporary albums coming out. Reviews that cater to the historical output of what has already come out. Because what we've noticed is it's all good and well to kind of assess the quality of work being brought out as we live and breathe. But are we actually taking note of the years that have passed and what they've done to the mold of our music and the cultural impact that those artists have made and where they are right now? So, we have created anniversary review segments, and you're watching the very first anniversary review segment. How these segments are going to work is that every time a monumental piece of rap work celebrates the 5 to 10 to 20 year mark, we celebrate it by talking about it, by actually going over the time that has passed and assessing its growth over the years. Because isn't it true that greatness is measured through time, and as time goes by, it allows us to truly assess the fluctuating tides of what we value? So without any further ado, welcome to our very first anniversary review. This is going to be an awesome one. Now, for those who know the story of South African hip-hop, the two pillars of the narrative tend to be Cape Town and Johannesburg, and we have an illustrious list of artists who have come out from the early 90s to what can be referred as the golden era of South African rap, which basically starts from 2003 to 2005. This peak is regarded as a golden era because it's a moment where stylistically a lot of the industry began to take note of this bubbling underground movement that was being interpreted by the South African youth and began investing in its power to be a mass market tool. Now, this changed the game because it allowed for rappers who were previously dismissed as American wannabes to finally have their forefront opportunity to express why, how, and where they attempt to take hip-hop. So to inaugurate, to start off this very, very important anniversary review segment, the first album is by a very well-known Joburg hip-hop rapper, producer, an OG, as they say, a legend, a man who, if you're in South Africa and you say the words ammunition, everybody who's basically a thorough purist, hip-hop head at heart and has been following the culture from the early 90s onwards. I'm gonna give a leeway of exception to Ama 2000, aka the Gen Z generation, because if we're talking about ammunition's influence, it definitely encompasses more or less a 90s to mid to late 2000s kind of notability. So, Ammunition's first album, released in 2003. My God, it's been quite a while.
20 years.
It's been 20 years. 20 years. That's a whole adult. You know, for as long as this album has been alive, breathing, and pulsating in the airwaves and in just culture in general, this has been the time. Ammunition, just a little bit of a bio on who Amu is. Straight out of Gauteng, a rapper who was very, very important because he became part of a class of rappers who absconded from rap's previously hyper-American indulgence and stepped into the brave new frontiers of interpreting rap in modes of isiZulu, township slang and in ways that represented a mirror to the direct hood narratives of South Africans. Amu basically being taken into the cusp by Lanster and Ghetto Rap was one of the first artists who was given the platform to showcase the quality of South African rap when it's given the opportunity to thrive. Now, the beautiful thing about Ammunition, as somebody who's risen from the ciphers and the sessions of the inner city Joburg scene, the legendary Lee clubs and such, was an artist who understood both spectrums of hip-hop's palette. He came from this ultra radical, super masculine place that we are famously known for criticizing, where hip-hop is presented as a niche primarily for men who high on the ego trip of knowledge and literacy. And he stepped out into a place where he tried to genuinely speak to the greater mass public by telling his story, which was really the story of a disgruntled artist who felt rejected by his own kind after he decided to take the step into a more commercialized palette of rap. The Rap, Life and Drama is what that album was called, and it really sums up what he was going through. He's a rapper who came from this really tight underground space, which now was vehemently against him because he had quote-unquote sold out. Remember, this was a different time. 2003 is a time where you literally could have something called underground. It was a time where the industry was really segmented into the artists which were bankables and assisted by corporates, and the rest were basically just left behind to try to fizzle and do their own thing within small minorities and groups. There was the challenge. Those who jumped in to a sound scope which spoke more to commercial trends. And that time, when you're talking commercial trends, 2003 is the height of a Jay-Z, P. Diddy influenced era of rap. It's sparkly, it's got tones of sampling, it's just recovered from the griminess of the hood and is learning to clean itself up and polish itself for a greater mass public. Comes Ammunition, influenced by that kind of hip-hop and trying to create a dialogue between fundamentalist heads and the rest of South Africa, saying, listen, on the other side of the conversation are cats who feel the most important thing to do is be real. But what is being real? And I think what this album and the whole 15-track entree into the story goes into is exactly that topic. Ammunition speaks with a lot of bitterness, admittedly, about being outcasted from a culture he felt he played a fundamental role in developing. A lot of the lyrics are anecdotes and narrative of his own personal journey as a rapper, and basically middle finger flips to all those who didn't believe that the path he was pursuing was worthwhile and were discarding him as just another sellout. And really, he was. He was selling out to a greater world. And as we've come to learn, selling out isn't the issue. It's how you negotiate the terms of what you're selling. Because the value in what you give is as great as your awareness and understanding how you can take the profit from that and build yourself from the ground up. So I think anybody who's still preaching the selling out narrative in 2023 is as outdated can be. We've learned selling is something everybody is forced to do in the context of capitalism. So it isn't selling out, it's about understanding the value of who you sell to and whether or not you are selling your own soul in the process. And for Ammunition, his soul was really intact. He focuses on narratives which speak about this. Like for instance, on the track Face Facts, he metaphorically refers to his arrangement with the industry as a deal with the devil. And he says, if that's what you want to call it, I accept that. Because for Amu, it isn't really, the sin is not in dealing with the devil. The sin is not being smart enough to get your due when you do it. Amu knew he was dealing with a greater devil in terms of the industry hype and the power and the buy-in. But he, as a producer and an artist, and one-part member of the group Township Frequency, whose name really speaks for the virtue and ethos of what Amu was trying to do alongside Selvin and Wicked. Tag in the leader of this unit, somebody who's very methodical, super focused in the vision of broadening South African hip-hop's then very narrow limits. And the reason this album is so monumental is because it literally stretched the capacity of what was possible with SA rap. If POC laid the foundation that it is possible to be a rapper, what Ammunition did is that he showed us the possibilities of how to shape rap therein. POC started it, Ammunition developed the formula. And I think it was ironic that he named Selvin's album that, because you see it in his blueprint. Ammunition is a master strategist. He wants to say, let's move away from the quote-unquote underground and remain on the surface of our own awareness. It is no mistake that the name of the label he started was Above Ground. This is literally a play on Amu's whole vision, to be above the ground, not to sink beneath, to be seen, to be visible, to be understood. The man had a plan, and oh my god, did he execute it so perfectly. The sonics of this album are very much a reflection of the times when it was a perfect synthesis of American boom bap bravado and that Jersey ambition, quote-unquote, ukufoster. Ammunition ufoster his way into the gates of people's minds, into the imagination of narrow rappers who think rapping is only Americanism, and most importantly, into the industry, which requires a level of self-respect for the artist. So let's go into the conceptual scheme, which makes this a classic even after 20 years. Now, the brilliance in Amu's approach is the sonics. The man, I feel, is first and foremost a producer. And right here, this album is a throwback to the phase of the late 90s, early 2000s, where sampling classical European music was all the rage. But it was hard to execute. See, nobody could just be a RZA and wake up. Nobody could just be a Q-Tip and wake up. You have to have the kind of expertise to understand the metrical, deep, intricate cultural nuances which were laden in classical music to interpret it in a way which was, well, fundamentally African. And oh my god, did Ammunition do this with ease. Albeit being accused of literally biting a beat from Exhibit's paparazzi in order to make attention, till this day there are verdicts out on whether or not he knew and genuinely just took the beat as it was, or he sampled that well-known classical signature without really being aware that it had been done before. Nevertheless, Ammunition's knack for sampling not only classical but music of a kind of nostalgic, warm tone into the grimy, energetic, angsty emotions of a rapper trying to get his word out is freaking superb. What he does is that he lays the beat with simplicity. He finds an interesting groove, and it's this groove is seeing this rhythm of South Africa that Amu's able to tap into. He's able to use drum patterns that were more akin to kwaito than they were to classical boom bap, but in a metronome which resembles boom bap. See, Ammunition is the perfect balance of understanding the best of what South Africa had to offer back then and bringing it into the palette of the golden era of hip-hop. And this is why this album is a South African classic. I dare even say an African classic, because in rap, life and drama we find the blueprint for understanding the politics of your people, understanding the limits that currently constrain the art you're trying to do, and most importantly, taking all of that into consideration in order to bridge the gap and create something authentic and innovative. And Amu did that then, and the question with anniversary reviews is the impact that the album has when it resonates years later. 20 years later, sadly, we are in a generation whose kind of syndicated attention and hyper-Americanism proved Amu's point 20 years later. We are in an era where now being more American is more lucrative than it was even back then, where the authentic artist is kind of swimming in limbo because of an era where global technologies have shifted the attention away from an interest in localism into a kind of blind international flow. But all is not lost, because what we've noticed is those who dive deep into that global flow tend to sink very quickly. And after all is said and done, artists who the world speaks fondly of are those who understand how to, again, like Amu, bridge that perfect synthesis of their local unique aspects with what the rest of the world is doing. I think if this album was dropped in an era with TikTok and Facebook and Twitter, it would have been a sensational bridging of the diaspora and the continent together. It would have shown Americans that there are people who understand hip-hop to the core. And I'm talking about the core, I'm talking about the basis of the break beat. Ammunition is a scientist of the break beat. He implements what the original masters did with James Brown, with the classical instruments of Abanda Bafana, Nemuvas, and all of the classical groups in South Africa's musical history. Ammunition is a student of not only the game in particular, but the general culture of his country as a whole. So, ultimately, when you listen to this album, it rings a nostalgic influence. And if, like me, you were born somewhere between late 80s and early 90s, you still appreciate the fact that it oozes with so much clarity, quality, conviction, originality, reminds you of a time where the simple things were the most impressive, reminds you of a time where authenticity is what mattered the most, and reminds you that even after all these years, nothing kicks quite like somebody who's understood their vision and strategizes themselves in a way that is separate from others within the context of what is popular. Because Ammunition, taking in everybody who was around him back then, from my man Hauser, who back then was known as Howard, being the vocalist for almost a whole lot of these hooks, because back then you needed to have a singing ass nigga. This was pre-Drake, folks, so not all rappers wanted to sing. Hardly any rappers wanted to sing. You had to bring a singer along if you wanted those neat hooks. And his team, in terms of Selvin, and bringing in right there one of the most promising MCs of that era, who became a legend in his own right, Proverb, to kick it on attention about the politics of hip-hop in South Africa. And my oh my, that track still rings true today. From Proverb's intricate dialogue about whether or not rapping in English was going to work, to Selvin's annoyance at hip-hop not being authentic and asking the question, what about Ikwaito? Wanna try it? Fuck it, I don't like it. No be hip-hop in my flop. We stick to it because we understand the DNA of what it takes to bring it forward in ways that are novel and new. So lastly, I really want to say to the younger generation, this album is an opportunity to tap into your roots, your history, and to see how far the art of originality has gone. Because I think without an Amu, you cannot have a squatter camp. You cannot have a pro kid. You cannot have an AKA. You cannot have a Kulichana. Amu showed us the blueprint of what was possible when you're black, from the township, and a lover of rap music, and how to take this rap and introduce it into audiences which would understand that Aulo Koporosh that's trying to steal an international culture, but you're a true, thorough Autasekasi who's just trying to understand how to bridge, evolve, and develop us as a whole by learning from the experiences of others, especially if those others mirror our direct prism of blackness. So, give thanks to Amu for such an amazing project that I think, even after all these years, 20 years, deserves to be revered within the tone of great South African rap. And for all those watching this, tap into it, plug into it, it's readily available. And I think what we learned from the story of Amu years later is that South Africans don't appreciate their kind unless the world tells them to do it first. Because Amu's still alive, lo and behold, nothing has ever been done to celebrate the man as an individual in his impact. Lo and behold, we still have petty little politics that get in the way of appreciating our pioneers in this game. See, that's the fundamental difference between us and America. Is we might revere America's archetypes, but we haven't understood that America is a master at celebrating its own stories and elevating them to the level of mythology. Where is our South African rap mythology 20 years later? Who are the founding fathers of South African rap? Why? Where? How? I know hardly a hip-hop head can answer this question because we don't have an embodied archive, and that's part of our problem. And these reviews might be one of the solutions in changing our attitudes and allowing us to celebrate ourselves before anybody else bigs us up. So I want to say big up to Ammunition, the principal, the teacher, the master, layer of bricks in the foundation of this game we revere and love. Please holler at us in the comment section if you feel this album was monumental in your life. Tell us where you were, what it reminds you of, because this is an anniversary, baby. It's 20 years and we're celebrating an album which took us, I remember, goddamn, when I was listening to this project, I was still in school, I was still trying to find my way within this rap game, rapping my ass off in English and trying to understand why there was a disconnect. And it was albums like these which helped bring me back to that question, who are you rapping for? Thank you, Ammunition, for answering that question 20 years ago, and I hope cats is still listening. If you're not rapping for your people, there's no way you will be able to be understood by other people in general, because by rapping for your people, it is your people which tell your story to the rest of the world. My name is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. It's been an anniversary reviews. We don't give these a rating because they're classics just by virtue of being a part of this ensemble. Love and peace and blessings. Salute.